What's up, everyone? Tara Roberts here with Bleacher Report, and it is week 5. And today we are talking fantasy stars that you should trade away immediately. Or I'm sorry, actually, buy low candidates. Fantasy stars that we should trade away was last week. Now we're doing buy low candidates. So we talked about the sells. Now we got the buys. As always, let's go ahead and jump in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. If you have any trade questions or anything else in terms of like waivers or rankings or anything or injuries, because we had a lot, unfortunately, happen there in week 4. And we got a lot of stuff that we have to deal with. We've got bye weeks here finally hitting. So it is a critical time for fantasy football here. So jump in the comments and let me know your thoughts. But we're going to go ahead here and get started. We're going to go ahead and get started with the first player that we're going to talk about for a potential buy low candidate here. It is Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers, buy low candidate. You wouldn't have thought that heading into the season, but last week we talked about buying on sells that we had. And when we're talking about buy candidates here, we want to look for guys who have the potential to increase in value as the season goes on. And Brock Bowers is absolutely one of those guys here. When you're looking for potential buy low candidates, oftentimes you want to look at guys who are in bad situations that are temporary, that are not long-term issues here. Like, let's take, for example, Drake London, who had a very strong bounce back game. He was a buy low candidate for me last week, and we saw him in a better matchup here. And then we realized that, hey, it's just that Atlanta has been in bad matchups that have really been holding him back. So when we look at Brock Bowers, what is the issue that has been holding him back? It's not really the matchups. It's not as the offense as much as you would think it is. It's the fact that he's been playing through an injury. We know that in week 1, he suffered an injury, and it's one of those injuries where it's just kind of nagging. He's trying to play through it, and that's awesome. We appreciate him getting out there and doing his best for us. But unfortunately, he is clearly limited. We can see that because we can look at stuff like his snaps. Last season, when Brock Bowers really got going, he was constantly on the field, literally never came off, was upwards of 90% of the snaps played in every single game. Now, when we look at him this season, he has not hit that level at all. He's been playing a little bit reduced here. It's not a massive issue. He's still got a pretty decent floor for us, but he's not hitting that ceiling, playing with a knee brace, obviously playing through something. So as the season progresses and he gets into better health, right, we can see him turn back to the Brock Bowers that we need him to be from a fantasy perspective and who the Raiders need him to be from a pass catcher perspective. Because while they've had the increase in targets and opportunities here for a guy like Trey Tucker, right, that's not something that they can consistently rely on. Jacoby Myers hasn't really been Jacoby Myers either. They need somebody to step up. They finally got the run game going, and Geno Smith has been struggling. But when you don't have a true consistent short target, that probably might be a lot of the issues there. So if they can get Brock Bowers going here, and we know that they want him to be the primary look in this offense, that is a great opportunity for us to buy low right now and know that there are better days around the corner, especially if that production from Ashton Jeanty is going to keep continuing forward as well, and the Raiders offense can benefit as a whole. I'm going to move on to our next player here. Our next player is going to be Teteroa McMillan here. You got to go with me on this with him as a buy low candidate here, because I know the production has been frustrating for him, right? And we know that he's the wide receiver 1 there. Unfortunately, the Panthers offense just hasn't provided the opportunities. If you look at his stats there, we've got 0 touchdowns. Wide receiver ranking, it's 30, right? He's because he's been present. He's been getting volume. He's had between 8 to 10 targets a game. So that's good, because a lot of these guys that we're talking about, some that are on the list that we're going to talk about in a second here, some of the concerns for them is targets and opportunity, right? Ted McMillan doesn't have that issue. He has volume opportunities. It's just a matter of whether or not Bryce Young can consistently get that to him. And we know that the opportunity does exist for Bryce to get that to him, because we saw it in week 2 where they played against Arizona, a defense that has actually been fairly stout, but does have up and downs depending on how healthy they are. He had 100 yards receiving in that game. Again, no touchdowns. That was a bummer. But not so coincidentally, that was a game where Bryce Young threw multiple touchdowns and for over 300 yards. So when we're looking at targets and opportunity, that's going to consistently be there for him. And that's why we want to buy in. We just need Bryce Young to get into better situations. When we look at him in week 3, Atlanta's pass defense is strong. Last week against New England, they got Christian Gonzalez back. That increased the strength of that defense there for New England. Moving forward, though, when we look at Carolina, we have matchups against Miami, Dallas, the Jets defense, who was thought of as traditionally strong, but have been struggling overall recently. We've got Buffalo that does tend to allow a decent amount of volume. We saw the game be a lot closer than it should have this past week against New Orleans. Green Bay, who, again, we just saw significant volume given up to Dallas. New Orleans again. And then when we jump to the playoff, they have a very nice playoff schedule with both Tampa Bay and New Orleans. Again, Tampa Bay being very pass friendly here. So a potential buy low candidate here because we've got a rookie. He's not performing to where we drafted him for his ADP, but at the end of the day, he is the clear wide receiver 1 and he doesn't have competition. We do have Jalen Coker that is going to come back, and perhaps that will help in terms of opening up some of those opportunities deeper because Coker will be a guy that operates out of the slot, help get the offense going a little bit, maybe some more potential red zone production that Ted McMillan can take an opportunity of. But again, we have better days ahead that we can buy low on him. Clear wide receiver 1. Volume is not an issue. We just have to get Bryce Young into more advantageous matchups where he can actually throw for volume and not like 100 yards, right? But yes, so we've got Brock Bowers as a potential buy low, Ted McMillan as a buy low. I want to go on to our next buy low candidate. This one is maybe going to take a little convincing for you. It's Alvin Kamara. You probably are thinking when we're looking at this New Orleans offense, we don't want to buy into a potentially bad situation here and make the mistake. The Saints are in a bad situation. They are literally gunning for that number 1 spot, that number 1 pick there. I won't sugarcoat it. Again, this is an issue. The offense is an issue for Alvin Kamara here. When we're looking at him, volume is not an issue. He's getting carries. He is being relatively productive with those carries. He is not struggling. It's not as if we're looking at Alvin Kamara and saying that he's older, he's turned a corner, and we're seeing a massive decrease in effectiveness from him. In 3 of the 4 games that he's played, he's had over 4 yards per carry very easily in them. Seattle is the only game that he had, the only matchup that he had where he had under 4 yards per carry. That's very understandable. At this point, we've seen 4 weeks in a row that Seattle's defense has turned a significant corner there. It makes sense. Their coach is very defensive minded. They have a lot of talent. They've really pulled stuff together and they are giving offenses fits, particularly against the run. So I give him a little bit of an excuse from that. If you remove that, Kamara has been very good in terms of getting to a floor. Unfortunately, the upside is just significantly limited. And obviously, it's difficult to trust him in that offense. Now, when we're looking at him, we want more increase in terms of checkdowns and being effective with them. He's getting some checkdowns, not as much as we would like to see from Alvin Kamara, but they're not really effective checkdowns. But the reason why we want to potentially invest in Alvin Kamara is not because we think the Saints offense is going to turn around. It's because we don't think this is going to turn around. And what could happen here is they could be very willing to part ways with Alvin Kamara in a trade opportunity. He will be if we get to the NFL trade deadline, he's going to be one of those running backs. Him and Breece Hall are often floated around a lot as the potential diamonds of being potential trade targets for teams that are looking to make those pushes, but underwhelming at running back, like Washington, even as Chicago has been mentioned a lot is a potential opportunity because DeAndre Swift has been underwhelming in his production as well. So there are opportunities for him if we want to invest in him because he's definitely at a low right now. He's hitting a floor, he lacks a ceiling, but he's still got the talent to where as we progress here, we could see a turnaround for him if he were to get into another offensive situation. But even if he doesn't, the schedule does get more favorable here because, again, when we're looking at the schedule, it's been kind of up and down. We've got some of those difficult defensive matchups against Seattle in particular. But when we're looking at the schedule moving forward, we have opportunities here in terms of production for him. New England, Giants. Tampa Bay is very favorable in terms of potential checkdowns. We've got Chicago that should be a favorable opportunity for him. Atlanta that should be a little bit favorable in terms of potential checkdowns for him from a running back situation. Miami is a very favorable offense. Again, we got Carolina as well. So when you're looking at New Orleans, there are opportunities for Kamara. You're going to be vying him at a very, very low production situation, and you're not going to have to make a significant investment into him. So we can buy him on the cheap here. I'm going to turn to the chat here. And yep, we've got from Knicks Patriots. I traded for Alvin Kamara today in hopes that he gets traded. That's the primary. It's floated a lot here. It's a very realistic situation. There's not a lot of hope for them to be able to turn this around here, and they're not going to be able to compete, even in that. And that's typically been a thing for them over the past couple of years. They haven't been good, but when you're in the NFC South, there's always opportunity. It's not there anymore for them, unfortunately. So our hope here is, again, we're saying that he is a solid trade candidate to see himself upgraded into a better position. It is a risky situation, right? Because if that trade doesn't happen, you're again sitting here looking at, floor production for him. But in PPR, he is at least getting 2 double-digit fantasy points and does give you RB2 upside here. So while he's not the typical Alvin Kamara production that we've seen in the past, it wouldn't be a situation where you're putting him out there, and you're getting completely blanked. From RT3693, J.K. Dobbins or Chase Brown tonight? Definitely Dobbins. I like Dobbins actually a lot. He's on a 3-touchdown streak here in terms of games. Should get that opportunity again. He's operating as the clear lead back. As long as he's healthy and on the field, he's the back in that offense with the most upside here. Chase Brown, it's a difficult situation. I did move him back in rankings, right? It was difficult to move him back significantly. Main reason for it being difficult moving him back significantly is that it is a really good matchup here. So if there's a chance that he finally gets some kind of upside game and finally has production on the ground, it would be this matchup here. But J.K. Dobbins is just the far safer bet here. I've got him significantly higher in rankings. From A Potts, AJ Brown, question mark. So AJ Brown, we talked about on the last show. I had him as a sell candidate. The reason that I had him as a sell candidate is that the production that we saw, the high production that we saw in that matchup with the LA Rams, that's something that we wanted to trade him off and try to capitalize on that. Because the reality is that the Eagles don't want to be a pass-heavy offense. They want to be a run-heavy offense. They want to lean on Saquon Barkley. So the volume is just going to be inconsistent for both AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, right? So you take the good with the bad. When they're in matchups where they're going to be forced to have to throw the ball, awesome, right? AJ Brown will have upside because he's AJ Brown. There's no talent issue here with him. But in matchups where they can just lean on the ground game, play from ahead, it's not a major issue. They're not chasing points or anything, which again, they're a great team. That's not going to happen a lot. Unfortunately, they're going to do everything that they can to lean on the ground game here. So he's not a buy candidate for me because if you do need a high upside play, like let's say that maybe you are, let's say you're 1-3, right? Or 0-4, and you need somebody that you can plug into a lineup and, have a 20-point ceiling, right? That exists, right? But you got to recognize that it's highly risky and it won't happen on a consistent basis there. From Jakelin6, I hope Chase Brown is on the list. I will do a spoiler alert. Unfortunately, he is not on the list here. And the reason for that, again, is that Chase Brown is the clear lead back. I don't think there's any threat to his workload. We did see kind of, and granted it was a blowout, but we did see an increase in, obviously we haven't seen week 4, but back in week 3, we did see an increase in usage there for guys like Samaje Perine who didn't get hurt, and then Taj Brooks as well. But I still think that Brown is ultimately going to be the lead back there. But what I don't think is going to change, unfortunately, is the run blocking of the offensive line. It's just flat out bad. I do think that we're going to see more volume there pushed from Jake Browning, and ultimately it's going to be relying on Browning to give checkdowns. And thus far, example-wise, it doesn't seem like he is very inclined to do a lot of checkdowns, unfortunately. So unless Zach Taylor can creatively scheme up getting Chase Brown more involved in the pass game, it's just going to be more frustration. So I hate that for him. It's not his fault. It is literally just the absence of Joe Burrow and the poor offensive line that has put Chase Brown in this bad situation. So unfortunately, he is not a buy low candidate for me because that offensive line isn't changing. From Ryan Wink 12, BTJ isn't going to break out, is he? I'm going to talk about BTJ later. I won't tell you exactly where we're going to talk about it. I won't spoil it that much here, but we are going to talk about him. I think it's there for him. The potential for him to turn things around is there because his situation is a lot different than some of these guys on the list. In terms of the Jags are not actually that bad of a team. They're winning right now. There's no massive risk here. Their run game is thriving. It's just that BTJ has to pull things together himself, but we'll talk about it a little bit more later there. From Daniel Carlero, Lad, Devontae, or Brian Thomas Jr. In terms of trade targets, the one that I have the highest there is definitely BTJ. We talked about Devontae and we talked about AJ Brown. Same concept is applied there with Devontae Smith. Again, the pass volume is just so inconsistent unless it's forced. And then Lad, let's talk about Lad here. And then I'll jump back to the chat. With Lad McConkey, he is actually my next player on this list. Let's talk about the good news. Let's start off positive with Lad McConkey. Good news is that he still has the most snaps, still has the most routes. There is no diminishing role in terms of his actual usage, right? The bad news, though, Quinn Johnson is real. We have to accept that now. Apparently, he is the most coachable player that ever existed. His year-over-year improvement since his rookie year is real. He just apparently responds well and works hard there. And we have to take him seriously. Keenan Allen is exactly who Keenan Allen has been. They are both operating as top 12 receivers. And unfortunately, their strengths have left Lad McConkey, unfortunately, in the dust here. But not massively in the dust, but he does have the least amount of targets, least receptions, least yardage, and he is the only one without a touchdown here. So why is he a buy low candidate on this list? Well, while it's entirely possible that he might be the least talented member of this grouping, and that does make sense, right? The thing that makes him a buy candidate for us here is that Justin Herbert is actually pushing volume. We often think of this Chargers offense as they want to be run heavy, right? Just because of coaching, right? Traditionally, this coaching staff and offensive coordinator, we look at them and they want to be run heavy. And they technically can because Amari and Hampton has been amazing. But when you've got Justin Herbert operating at such a high level, they're allowing a very balanced attack and they've been pushing significant volume through the air, volume that we didn't see consistently out of Justin Herbert over the past couple of years here. The offense is thriving aside from the offensive line issues, which are major issues, but that's not something that we can control, right? And despite the offensive line issues, Justin Herbert is still getting the ball to his receivers. It's just unfortunately that Lad McConkey is the one that is not being the primary recipient here. Now, he isn't disappearing. That's the good news here. So good news is that we've got volume. He's not disappearing. His usage is not being reduced. His time on the field is not being reduced. He is still a prominent portion in this offense. And when we look at these receivers here, going 3 deep is very realistic, right? But Keenan Allen, while I do love him, and he is a start, not someone that I'm trying to fade by any means, we do have to be realistic about the fact that he is 30 and wondering if he can keep this pace for an entire season. Last season, he played 15 games. Often we've seen him play less than that. So that is the big question here. If anything were to happen to Keenan Allen or even, Quentin Johnston, Lad by default would be put back as one of the top 2 options. They would still be pushing volume. He would be perfectly fine here. So Lad is still a good buy low within this offense just because of the opportunity. You don't typically think of wide receivers as handcuffs, but he is technically in a handcuff situation where he is a wide receiver who, if anything happens to the others around him, would benefit significantly here. Again, this is a good buy low for a team that doesn't have to actually start him. If you're a team that is struggling, 1-3, 2-2, and you need wins, targeting Lad might be an issue for you because he is not going to be putting up massive numbers. I think these still numbers lean still pretty aggressively towards the other receivers here. Jumping back to the chat here from Josh M243. Traded Pickens, Chase Brown, Dontavian Wicks, and a 2nd-round pick for Rice and Harvey. Do you think I made out okay? I think you did. The Chase Brown, we talked a little bit about Chase Brown here, the fact that I do think that Ultimately, this is just not going to be a good year for him. Dontavian Wicks, again, we saw last night, he is just not the priority in that offense. George Pickens, you are trading on a high here. CeeDee Lamb is not going away forever, right? They were basically they didn't put him on IR. They gave like a 3-week time period here. We know what type of injury was. There's no ambiguity with that type of injury. So we're thinking that 3 to 4 weeks is kind of the realistic time frame for him. So while Pickens, finally did have that massive breakout performance, right? I think, it's okay to trade high on him right now. And getting Rashee Rice, who is going to have a prominent role in that Chiefs offense. I mean, when we think about the fact that Travis Kelce has just kind of fallen to the wayside, right? He was definitely on the sell list last week to try and get what you can out of him because unfortunately, it just looks like he's fading there. And then Harvey, we talked about J.K. Dobbins and the strength of him. But Dobbins, well, we know, has the injury concerns. If anything happens to Dobbins, Harvey would obviously step into a strong RB1 role. So I think, that's a fine long-term situation there. From Sell Miami Heat, Saquon Barkley isn't doing anything for me this year. Yeah, the Eagles offense is a weird one, right? Because they're overall, they're fine. Jalen Hurts in particular is probably the big beneficiary there. But Saquon Barkley doesn't look as efficient as we would like him to be. Now, I will say that the Eagles have not been in the most advantageous matchups in terms of defensive situations for the run specifically. They've been matchups that have been more beneficial to the pass. So Saquon not being super efficient isn't a surprise there. We do have to kind of consider the fact that he was coming off a significant volume season. So seeing a little downtick in production is not unusual here, but Saquon is still, he's not a buy low candidate here because he is Saquon, and he's not a sell high candidate because he's not super performing. He's just he is what he is right now. He's still in a offense that wants to primarily utilize him, right, as the main focus of that offense here. So we don't want to panic too bad on him right now. Moving on to my next player here, because we were just talking about George Pickens. I think that is very apt to move on to my next player, which is CeeDee Lamb as a buy low here. Again, we talked about it. Injury situation, we know exactly what it is. He'll be back in a few weeks here, maybe 2 weeks here. We'll monitor it. But this is the perfect buy low situation for a team that does not need him right now. I do a lot of Q&As. I see a lot of trade proposals. And CeeDee Lamb is actually a name that is floating around a lot as a potential buy for teams who maybe drafted well and have an extra running back and can afford to trade away a high-end running back, get CeeDee Lamb and sit Lamb on the bench until he comes back, right? Because, they drafted well. They don't have to use him right now. When we look at CeeDee Lamb's production this season, it's been a little bit frustrating. And granted, it's just a couple of games, but it's been a little bit frustrating, right? Because George Pickens is the one that's been getting the touchdowns, right? And CeeDee Lamb's first 2 weeks, they were actually floor games. But when you think about it, having floor games that are like 18 and 20 fantasy points, that is actually crazy here, right? When we look at those overall numbers, the fantasy points per game is super low because he did play in that week 3 game, so it does bring down the average. But in week 1 and week 2, he scored 18 and 20 fantasy points in PPR. He had no touchdowns, unfortunately, but the reality is that the week 1 performance was actually a poor performance because he had all those drops. Still 18 points, over 100 yards, double-digit targets. This is a high volume guy who is putting up top 15 performances and hasn't really been at his peak performance there. Now is an excellent time to buy, right? And particularly to sell George Pickens, right? Or you don't have to sell George Pickens, but we're looking at the game that George Pickens had. It was absolutely insane. He's had 4 touchdowns this season. He is performing at a peak level. And he finally got that big yardage game without CeeDee Lamb there. But we also have to consider the fact that Dallas's defense is truly awful. You don't have to believe in Dak Prescott. I know that Dak Prescott is the person that kind of holds people back in terms of saying, where should I start? When should I start George Pickens? Should I be? I had a lot of start-sit questions this week in terms of people being a little bit scared of starting George Pickens because of Dak Prescott. And it's like, no, just like Dak may have his problems. He may make ill-advised passes and he may throw interceptions, but he is throwing for volume here. You don't have to believe in Dak to know that 40-plus attempts is going to be a very regular thing for him this season. The Cowboys have a difficult schedule. But the key here is that once they get past these next couple of games, they're going to be facing offenses that will be dragging their defense. This team is going to be pushing aggressive volume here. CeeDee Lamb is going to return to regular double-digit targets, 100-yard games, and you can buy low right now, stash him on your bench, and just massively increase your team's overall fantasy production by adding in a literal wide receiver one on the cheap there. Moving on to the chat here. From Daniel Bowen 06, traded Ginty for JSN last week, hoping week one was a fluke. I like both Ginty and JSN. It was good to see Ginty finally get that massive game. It was expected, though, right? We knew that if there was going to be a matchup defensively, that this was going to be the one that favored Ginty. JSN has been very solid and kind of similar to CeeDee Lamb. I actually think the games that we have been seeing from JSN have been more floor games and that there's a higher ceiling that he could get to. Seattle's defense has been very strong. They've been in matchups where they haven't had to push aggressive volume because they've been facing teams that have shaky offensive situations and inconsistencies, right? So once we get into Seattle getting more high upside opportunities, pushing a little bit more volume, we're going to see JSN ascend to another level there. So it was good to see Ginty have a strong game. JSN is good rest of season here. So I actually do like both of those, both sides of the trade as well. It just kind of depends on what you needed at the time. So no, I think you made a good trade if that works out for the position that you needed. Moving on to my next player here. My next player here is Derrick Henry. And this is weird because never once in my life of doing fantasy football have I ever been talking about Derrick Henry as a buy low. I honestly can't remember that. The opportunity has never presented itself because it's Derrick Henry, always leading the league in rushing touchdowns. You never get an opportunity to buy low on him. If there was ever a buy low time, it exists right now. So if you would like to go out and grab Derrick Henry on the cheap, now is the time. We got that massive week one performance against Buffalo, 18 carries, 169 yards, 2 touchdowns. It looked like, the Ravens offense was just looking like an absolute juggernaut. Zay Flowers was showing out. Everybody looked amazing, right? So when we're looking for positive takeaways here, yeah, week one was amazing, and we've just gone into 3 weeks where unfortunately he has had a max of 12 carries, less total yardage in those 3 games than he had in week one as a whole. 1 touchdown. The Ravens offense has been struggling. And when the Ravens offense struggles, Derrick Henry struggles as his production is exclusively on the ground, right? Yesterday, right? And this is why it's probably the opportune time to buy him low as a buy low candidate. Yesterday, he played his lowest snaps of the season. We saw Justice Hill get the bid workload, and Justice Hill looked good, but you got to remember Justice Hill does tend to pop when they're playing from behind, and you get those opportunities for him to have those big breakaway runs and the receptions for big gains as well. When we're looking at the games that they've played in, that makes a lot of sense as to why this offense is struggling and why Derrick Henry in particular is struggling. They've played against Cleveland since that Buffalo game. They've played against Cleveland, Detroit, Kansas City. These are all legitimately some of the worst run defensive matchups that you can have in the league. It's just been a terrible run for them. The upcoming schedule is far more advantageous, right? We're looking at Houston, the LA Rams. Again, these are offense or defenses that'll be a little bit more agreeable to the run. Then we have the bye week, but that's when things get really nice. They face Chicago, Miami. Then you jump to the playoff schedule. They play Cincinnati, New England, Green Bay. Derrick Henry, again, has literally never been a buy low candidate, but with how bad the Ravens look, we've got that injury to Lamar Jackson. This is the perfect time to jump in because after the next couple of games, we get into a very advantageous time period where we'll see things flip around. We'll get high volume work for Derrick Henry on the ground here. Going to go to the chat here real quick and see. Let's see. Blanco Bucks. Oh, I traded Ginty for Kamara. Am I cooked? It feels that way right now because Ginty had that massive production. I will say that we do, potentially have better days ahead for Kamara because of the trade opportunity. Vegas's will, and I hesitated here because I was doing another buy low somewhere else, and I hesitated to have Genty, sorry, a sell high, and I hesitated to have Genty as a sell high here because he is a lead back, right? But at the same time, he is still going to be matchup dependent. Chicago was just a flat out good matchup, so I wouldn't overreact right now. This could all work itself out very soon if we do get Alvin Kamara traded here. From 56-5 Favo, who starts between Jacobs, Javonte, Mason, Judkins, need 3 out of 4. So from that grouping, the one that I would sit is Javonte, and that's just because his workload can be a little bit varying because we have the situation where the Cowboys, if they have to push aggressive volume or they're playing behind, they could just be chucking the ball. Jacobs is just incredibly reliable, right? Mason's production on the ground has been solid. And when you're looking at Quinshon Judkins, the performance that he put on in this difficult matchup here, I mean, this is back-to-back weeks where we're looking at him. And quite frankly, I wish there would have been a buy low opportunity. The buy low opportunity was extremely low, very extremely short for him because he popped immediately here. So you got to start Judkins as well. Yeah, so don't, the instinct there might be to have Judkins be the one sitting just because of Cleveland's offense. But I really think that he is just thriving there, thriving there. Moving on to our last player that we are going to talk about on the list. It is Brian Thomas Jr. I alluded to it earlier. We talked about Brian Thomas Jr. ironically last week as a sell. Fantasy football is fluid. The value for BTJ has dipped so low that it actually makes a lot of sense to buy him right now. The issues that we talked about last week, they still stand with him. BTJ, the issue is that he flat out looks awful. Instinctually, we want to blame it on Trevor Lawrence. You see those fantasy points per game, 9. That is ridiculous. We have 1 touchdown. Again, your instinct is to blame it on Trevor Lawrence and the offense, but Trevor has actually not have a problem connecting with other receivers. And while he still has his accuracy and consistency issues here, a lot of the issues that Brian Thomas Jr. has struggled with in terms of drops and just weird random plays are kind of isolated to him specifically. Sorry, my dog is just going off right there in the background. But when we're looking, unfortunately, at this situation for BTJ, he's just off. There was one play in this past game where he had, and there's this picture of it on social media if you can find it. He was catching a ball towards the sideline and he had plenty of room to get both of his feet down. Inexplicably, did not get both feet down. It's almost as if he completely forgot that he was supposed to and required to get 2 feet down there. But again, the reason that he is a buy low candidate here is because there is zero threat to his job. He is the wide receiver 1. The offense as a whole is not actually that bad. We talked about Trevor Lawrence and his inconsistency, but he's throwing for enough volume. The run game has been thriving. Travis Etienne has been fantastic. You have the additional punch of Bashal Tutin as well. In this game, we finally saw Travis Hunter play the majority of snaps, and the snaps that he played on offense, right? The majority of snaps that he played on offense, and he wasn't a threat to Brian Thomas Jr.'s workload. I am so sorry for that crazy dog. He is barking at somebody, probably a child that is walking across home from the bus stop. But again, there is zero threat to his job. He is the wide receiver 1 of this offense. And we're looking at him as a potential buy. It's the issues that he has to fix in himself. He will be fine. The volume is there. He's the wide receiver 1. He has the upside. We've seen last season just how incredible his overall upside is. And yeah, that was with a different quarterback, but he is still the quarterback that can provide, and Trevor Lawrence is still the quarterback that can provide him with enough volume to have that same type of performance. He just has to get back on track. It's kind of in his head. Just kind of think about Marvin Harrison Jr., right? We kind of saw that. That's a good comp, right? Because we saw that live in action where Marvin Harrison Jr. Was dealing with drops, right? It seemed like he was in his head and he was able to turn it around mid-game. When talent is talent, right? You have to buy into it, especially if it's not an issue of trying to earn yourself a spot. It's just just an issue of you mentally getting yourself back on track. And that is the problem with Brian Thomas Jr. and why he is still a good buy low candidate, because the situation remains good. Going to go to the chat here and answer a question before we finish things off with D. Rami 2488 here. What about Woody Marks? Woody Marks is technically not a buy low because the hype is super high right now. But if you can grab him, acquire off waivers, acquire him from somebody, yeah, we have to operate with Woody Marks under the assumption that he is going to be the RB1 for the remainder of the season there. Nick Chubb has fortunately been rather inefficient. Unfortunately, he just is not providing the pop that the offense needs. And when we look at the potential long term here, again, we've got zero timeline on Joe Mixon. We had an update today that there is no expectation in terms of his return. He has not been on the field. He was not on the field at all this offseason. So while we do still need to see it for one more game, the spark that Woody Marks provided was incredible. The Titans are a bad team, right? But the Texans looked like a completely different team with the pop that Woody Marks gave there, and just overall fantastic. So from that perspective, Woody Marks is absolutely someone that you want to roster by any means necessary that you can, because I do believe that he is the best Texans back moving forward and can in fact push Nick Chubb out of the way, possibly completely there. Just to do a little recap here of our list, we had Brock Bowers as a buy. Again, Brock Bowers working through the injury. He still has extremely high potential. Tetaroa McMillan, wide receiver 1 at the Panthers, and better days ahead in terms of matchups where Bryce Young can provide more consistency there. Alvin Kamara as well as a buy low. Not a good offensive situation, but a really prime candidate for a potential trade deadline mover there. Lad McConkey with the addition of the Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnston's leap there. Unfortunately has fallen to the wayside, but Justin Herbert is still pushing significant volume, making him still a good buy low opportunity there. CeeDee Lamb injury, when he returns, he'll be back to the same CeeDee Lamb, getting double-digit targets, 100 receiving yards in a game, and hopefully the touchdowns start to get back in. But regardless, you can't do worse than that from a floor perspective from your wide receiver 1. Derrick Henry, finally, a Derrick Henry buy low opportunity here. They don't come often, so jump on it if you can. The Ravens have been in terrible defensive matchups, right? Better matchups are on the horizon here for Derrick Henry, so just relax. Don't panic on Derrick Henry. And then Brian Thomas Jr. It's not Trevor. It's not the offense. They're winning. They're doing well enough. The problem is that he just seems to be a little bit in his head right here and just needs to get back on track. He is still the wide receiver 1 there and still has that same massive upside that we saw last season. No one else is a threat to his workload in that offense. But that wraps things up. Again, I apologize for the barking dog who was so inappropriate there, disturbing our live. Make sure that you have got your alerts on again, because we've got more news coming out, more injuries as well. So you want to make sure that you can get all those notifications so that you jump on it in terms of waivers and trades and everything. I'm with you every single week on Mondays with fantasy advice to help you win your league. You can find me across all social media platforms at It's Sarah Time. And have a fantastic week. Good luck with your lineups and enjoy these Monday night games. We got 2 here. So I'll talk to you again next week, guys.